Kwesi stood on the red, dusty road leading out of his village, gripping a small bag that contained all his possessions. The morning sun bathed the lush hills in a golden hue, and the familiar sounds of the village waking up. A cock, a male chicken, crowing, women sweeping their compounds, and children laughing, faded behind him. Today was the day he had been dreaming about since he finished school, the day he would leave for Accra. The city had always been a place of wonder to Kwesi. From the stories told by returning villagers who spoke of bright lights, tall buildings, and endless opportunities, it seemed like a magical land where fortunes could be made. Accra was the place where dreams come true, and Kwesi was determined to make his dreams a reality. He had spent the last few months saving up small amounts of money from odd jobs, planning his departure meticulously. His old friend Yao, who had left the village 2 years prior, was his connection to this city of promise. Yao had written letters full of hope, boasting about his job as a mechanic and his modest room in a crowded neighborhood in Alajo, a suburb of Accra. Kwesi knew Yao would help him find his footing. With each mile, the Bone Shaker, a dilapidated, uncomfortable and outmoded vehicle, rattled and groaned, a patchwork of metal and parts that barely held together. The journey from the village was long and uncomfortable, the dirt roads and the potholes unforgiving. But Kwesi's excitement overshadowed any discomfort. The closer he got to Accra, the more he could feel the thrill of his new life taking shape. When the skyline of Accra finally appeared in the distance, with its scattered tall buildings and the sprawling, bustling streets, Kwesi's heart raced. This was it. This was the beginning of his new chapter. As the Bone Shaker pulled into the crowded station at Circle, Accra, Kwesi stepped off and immediately felt the oppressive heat and humidity of the city, different from the cool, breezy air of his village. The sound of honking cars, haggling market women, and distant music from a nearby shop assaulted his senses. Everything felt fast and loud, unlike anything he had ever experienced. But he smiled to himself, clutching his small bag tightly. This was what he had come for. He navigated the throng of people, asking for directions in his accented Twi, until he finally found the address Yao had sent him. Kwesi's excitement peaked as he climbed the stairs to a narrow, run-down apartment. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding with anticipation. Yao answered, looking surprised but delighted to see Kwesi. He was leaner than Kwesi remembered, his eyes a little more tired, but his smile was still warm and familiar. They hugged briefly, and Yao invited him inside. The room was small, much smaller than Kwesi had expected. It was cluttered with clothes, shoes, and tools strewn about. 3 other young men sat on the floor, eating from a shared bowl of gari and beans. Kwesi's smile faltered as he realized the cramped space left no room for him. Yao hesitated before speaking. Kwesi, it's good to see you, but things are tight here. We all share the rent, and it's tough as it is. Kwesi glanced around the room, his hopes deflating. There was barely enough space for the 4 of them, let alone a 5th. He understood Yao's predicament. It was clear that accommodating another person would be impossible. Yao scratched his head, looking genuinely apologetic. I wish I could help, but maybe you can find something nearby? There are some cheaper places around. I can ask around tomorrow. Kwesi nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. "It's fine, y'all. I'll figure something out." But as he stepped back out into the noisy street, reality hit him harder than he expected. He had no other friends in Accra, no other contacts, and nowhere to go. The bustling city that once seemed full of promise now felt like an overwhelming maze of strangers and unfamiliarity. Kwesi wandered through the city streets, clutching his bag and his dwindling hope. The first night, he found himself sitting on a bench in a small park, watching as the city's lights flickered on. He tried to get comfortable, but the hard wooden bench offered little solace. As darkness fell, Kwesi's first night in Accra turned into a restless battle against the buzzing mosquitoes and the cold bite of reality. He had never felt so alone. The next few days blurred into a haze of disappointment and uncertainty. Each morning, Kwesi woke up stiff and sore from sleeping on benches in alleys or any corner he could find that was relatively safe. His meager savings quickly dwindled as he bought small, cheap meals just to keep his stomach from grumbling. He tried to stay positive, wandering the streets of Accra in search of work, but every door he knocked on seemed to close in his face. In his village, Kwesi had always been resourceful, finding odd jobs to help his family. But in Accra, every opportunity required connections he didn't have. By day 10, Kwesi's determination was already fraying. His hands were calloused from carrying his bag, his feet sore from walking the city's unforgiving streets. He approached shops, stalls, and construction sites, asking if they needed help. The answer was always the same: a shake of the head, a dismissive wave, or sometimes just silence. Kwesi couldn't understand it. He was willing to work hard, but the city seemed to have no room for him. Yor did what he could, but with his own struggles to keep afloat, he could only offer Kwesi small amounts of money, just enough to buy food for the day. Kwesi didn't want to be a burden, so he often declined, forcing a smile and insisting he was managing. But in truth, his pride was taking a beating. He was tired of begging for scraps, tired of sleeping rough, and tired of the constant noise of the city that never seemed to quiet down, even at night. One evening, after another fruitless day of job hunting, Kwesi found himself at the bustling Kaneshi market. The market was alive with vendors shouting prices, customers haggling, and the smells of roasted plantains and fresh fish mingling in the warm evening air. Kwesi's stomach growled at the sight of the food, but he had nothing left to even buy the smallest portion. He sat down near a stall, his shoulders slumped. By day 20, he was surviving on handouts and scraps, finding temporary respite among the street boys at Kaneshi Market. He had made an uneasy alliance with Kofi, a streetwise boy who showed him how to sneak food from the market. A street boy, no older than 12, approached him. "You dey hung? I fit show you where you go fit get some chop," the boy said, switching effortlessly between Ga and Pidgin. Kwesi looked up, surprised by the boy's boldness. He nodded, too hungry to refuse. The boy led him through a maze of stalls and narrow alleys until they reached a small corner where a group of young men and boys were gathered. They were a rough-looking bunch, but Kwesi had little choice. He watched as they took turns sneaking pieces of food from unwatched stalls, moving with a practiced ease that spoke of experience. The boy who had led Kwesi there handed him a small loaf of bread. Kwesi hesitated, But hunger won over his morals. He took the bread and ate, grateful for the first full meal he'd had in days. The group didn't ask many questions. They were used to newcomers, young men like Kwesi who had come to the city with dreams and found themselves adrift. They taught Kwesi the basics of surviving on the street, where to find food, which places to avoid, and how to stay out of trouble with the authorities. Kwesi quickly learned that the city had its own rules, an unspoken code of conduct that governed the lives of those who lived on its margins. Despite the roughness of his new companions, Kwesi found a strange sense of camaraderie among them. They shared their little fortunes, a slice of bread here, a coin there, and looked out for one another, bound by their shared struggle. Kwesi fell into this rhythm, adapting to the hard life of Accra's streets. Each day was a new challenge, but he learned how to survive, slowly toughening as the city's harshness wore on him. One night, as they huddled under a bridge for shelter, Kofi, the boy who had first approached Kwesi, nudged him. "You know say Accra no be easy, but you for no give up. People dey make am every day. Your time go come." Kwesi nodded, staring at the dark city skyline. He wasn't ready to give up yet. Accra had tested him, but he was determined to find his place, no matter how long it took. However, his stress levels were at an all-time high, and the pressure of not being able to send money home weighed heavily on him. His younger siblings' school fees were due, and he had promised his mother that he would help. Each day without work was another day closer to breaking that promise, and the guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. Letters from home, filled with hopeful inquiries about his progress, only added to the mounting tension. He hated reading them, knowing he had no good news to share, and he felt ashamed that instead of being the provider, he was barely surviving himself. Kwesi couldn't shake the image of his siblings being sent home from school because he couldn't send the money. The dreams of his family's future, which had once spurred him on, now felt like a burden that he was struggling to carry. Weeks turned into months, and Kwesi's days in Accra began to blend. Each morning, he set off with renewed hope, determined that today would be different. He would wander through different parts of the city, following every lead he could find. Jobs posted on notice boards, rumors of someone needing help, anything that sounded like a chance. But every day ended with the same disappointment. Kwesi's spirit was being tested like never before. He had always been a proud young man, one who believed that hard work would eventually pay off. But Accra seemed determined to crush that belief. The streets were unforgiving, and with each passing day, Kwesi felt the city wearing him down. He could see the same weariness in the eyes of the others who lived on the streets, the same dull resignation that life had dealt them a bad hand. On day 31, while loitering near Makola Market, Kwesi overheard a conversation that piqued his interest. Two men were talking about a nearby construction site that had just opened up, and they needed laborers, people who could carry materials, mix cement, and do the heavy lifting that nobody else wanted to do. Kwesi's heart leapt at the possibility. He had worked on construction back in the village and knew he could handle the work. Without wasting a moment, he followed the directions he overheard, making his way through the crowded streets until he found the site. It was a large building project, with scaffolding towering into the sky and workers swarming around like ants. Kwesi approached the supervisor a burly man with a gruff demeanor and a permanent scowl etched into his face. "Sir, please, I heard you need workers. I can do any job," Kwesi said, trying to sound confident despite the nerves that were churning in his stomach. The supervisor looked him up and down, sizing him up. "You get experience?" "Yes, sir. I worked on building sites back home," Kwesi replied, though he didn't mention that those jobs were much smaller in scale compared to what he was looking at now. The supervisor grunted, then pointed to a pile of cement bags that needed moving. "All right, start here. If you no slack, I go pay you end of the day. No slack, oh." Kwesi nodded vigorously, relief washing over him. He threw himself into the work, lifting the heavy bags and carrying them across the site without complaint. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the work was backbreaking. But Kwesi didn't care. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. At the end of the day, Kwesi's muscles ached, and he was covered in sweat and dust. But when the supervisor handed him a few cedis for his work, Kwesi felt a surge of pride. It wasn't much, but it was the first real money he had earned in Accra. It was proof that his determination was paying off, even if only a little. Kwesi returned the next day and the next, slowly earning the respect of the supervisor and the other workers. He was reliable, strong, and never complained, no matter how tough the job was. After a couple of weeks, the supervisor pulled him aside. "You dey try, Kwesi. We fit keep you on longer if you want." Kwesi nodded, trying to hide his excitement. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it." As the weeks turned into months, Kwesi's life began to stabilize. The money he earned wasn't much, but it was enough to afford a small shared room in a rundown part of town. It wasn't much more than a bed and a roof, but to Kwesi, it felt like a palace compared to the cold, hard streets. He kept his head down and continued to work hard, slowly building up his savings and even sending small amounts back to his family in the village. It wasn't the glamorous life he had imagined when he first set out for Accra, but it was a start. And as Kwesi lay in his small room at night, listening to the distant hum of the city, he allowed himself to dream once more. Accra had tested him, broken him down, and rebuilt him in its harsh way. But now, finally, Kwesi was finding his way. Kwesi's days at the construction site became his anchor in Accra. The work was exhausting and the pay meager, but Kwesi had learned the value of persistence. With every passing week, he felt stronger, more in tune with the rhythm of the city. The supervisor had taken a liking to Kwesi, often giving him more responsibility on the site. Kwesi's ability to adapt quickly and his unwavering work ethic did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, as Kwesi was stacking bricks, the supervisor called him over. "Kwesi, come. I want you to meet somebody." Kwesi wiped the sweat from his brow and followed. The supervisor introduced him to a well-dressed man who looked out of place amidst the dust and noise of the site. This be Mr. Boadu. He dey manage some construction projects. He dey look for reliable workers. Mr. Boadu extended his hand. "I've heard good things about you, Kwesi. We're looking for someone like you on our next project. It's bigger pay, and it comes with housing. What do you think?" Kwesi's heart leapt. He could hardly believe his ears. He had been scraping by for months, and now, out of nowhere, a real opportunity had fallen into his lap. He shook Mr. Boadu's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint." Kwesi's new job was on a larger construction site in one of the more developed parts of the city. The pay was indeed better, and the housing was a significant upgrade from his previous cramped room. Kwesi moved into a shared dormitory with other workers, but it was clean, safe, and felt like a real step forward. With a stable income and a decent place to live, Kwesi's outlook brightened. He began to make plans, small steps towards his bigger dreams. He saved diligently, cutting back on unnecessary expenses and sending more money back to his family. His mother's letters were filled with pride and relief, knowing her son was making it in the big city. Kwesi also began to think about furthering his education. He had finished secondary school, but he knew that to truly advance, he needed more skills. On day 70, after work, he wandered into a local community center and saw a notice for evening classes in carpentry and welding. Kwesi signed up, using a portion of his savings to pay for the fees. He juggled his job with the classes, often going straight from the construction site to the community center. It was tiring, but Kwesi found joy in learning. The instructors were impressed by his dedication, and Kwesi quickly picked up the skills, realizing he had a knack for working with his hands. One evening, after a particularly long day, Kwesi received an unexpected visitor. Yao had tracked him down, having heard from mutual acquaintances that Kwesi had turned his life around. Yao was astonished by the changes he saw in his friend, Kwesi. Kwesi, who had once been lost and struggling, now stood confident and hopeful. They spent the evening catching up, reminiscing about the village and sharing stories of their respective journeys in Accra. Yao listened as Kwesi spoke about his new job and his plans for the future. "I'm proud of you, Kwesi. You've come a long way. When you came here, I didn't know how you would survive, but look at you now." Kwesi smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "It wasn't easy, Yao, but I'm grateful for every struggle. It made me stronger." Yao nodded, patting Kwesi on the back. "Accra be hard, but you be harder." As Kwesi lay in bed that night, he reflected on his journey. From the excitement of leaving his village to the harsh reality of sleeping on the streets, he had experienced the city's darkest and most trying moments. But he had also found friendship, opportunity, and a renewed sense of purpose. Accra had tested him in every possible way, but it had also shaped him into becoming the man he was becoming. Months passed, and Kwesi's efforts began to bear fruit. He was making progress in his carpentry and welding courses, and his instructors recommended him for a job with a small construction firm that specialized in custom woodwork and metal fabrication. The job was a significant step up from his previous labor-intensive roles. For the first time, Kwesi found himself working with more skilled professionals, learning the intricacies of the craft and refining his skills. He was earning more money, and his confidence soared as he took on more complex projects. Kwesi's hard work didn't go unnoticed. His new boss, Mr. Mensah, was a shrewd but fair businessman who valued Kwesi's diligence and skill. One day, after Kwesi had completed a challenging project, Mr. Mensah called him into his office. "Kwesi, you've done well here. I see a lot of potential in you. Have you thought about taking on more responsibility? Maybe even leading a small team?" Kwesi was taken aback by the offer. He had never imagined himself in a leadership role so soon. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored. I'll do my best." Under Mr. Mensah's mentorship, Kwesi quickly learned the ropes of project management. He led a small team, overseeing tasks and ensuring that projects were completed on time and to the high standards the firm was known for. It was a challenging transition, but Kwesi thrived under the pressure. He realized that the skills he had developed on the streets, resilience, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable work ethic were now his greatest assets. One day, as Kwesi supervised the installation of a custom-built staircase in a wealthy client's home, he took a moment to reflect. The once daunting cityscape of Accra that had overwhelmed him now felt familiar, even welcoming. He had carved out his own place in the city, not through luck, but through sheer determination and hard work. Kwesi's success began to extend beyond his professional life. With his improved income, he was able to move into a modest but comfortable one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was his own space, a place where he could unwind after a long day and dream about the future. Kwesi also made time to give back to those who had helped him along the way. He often visited the community center where he had taken his classes, volunteering to teach basic carpentry to younger boys who, like him, were searching for their way. He became a mentor, sharing his story and offering guidance to those who were struggling. He would often say, "Accra no be easy, but you fit make am if you no give up." As Kwesi's 100th day in Accra approached, he took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city that had once felt so alien and unforgiving. He thought about his first night on that hard bench, the hunger, the fear, and the uncertainty. He thought about Kofi and the others who had taught him how to survive, and the supervisor who had given him his first break. Every hardship and every struggle had been a step towards this moment. Kwesi knew that his journey was far from over. He still had big dreams. Maybe one day he would start his construction firm or build homes for those who had none. But for now, he was content with the progress he had made. He had faced Accra's challenges head-on, and he had emerged stronger. With a renewed sense of purpose, Kwesi smiled to himself. He was no longer the naive young man who had stepped off the bone shaker with nothing but a bag and a dream. He was Kwesi, the carpenter, the builder, the survivor, and he was ready for whatever came next. Accra had not broken him. It had built him anew. Thank you for watching. The AfriFolkTales team invites you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned for our next video.